to Nation of Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. Water crisis situation continues to drag on in the Kashechewan First Nation in Northern Ontario. Residents have been without safe drinking water since early in the new year after the community's water treatment system broke down. Many of these same residents have remained evacuated in faraway places such as Timmins, Kingston, and Niagara Falls for weeks. Alvin Fiddler is the Grand Chief of the Nishnawbe Aski Nation, which includes Kashechewan. He joins me today in studio to talk about this and other issues. So welcome back to Nation, Grand Chief Fiddler.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll start with Kashechewan as in the introduction there. Can you maybe give our viewers a bit of an update on how this is affecting, people being evacuated and if there's any sort of end in sight to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very difficult winter for the community. As you know, they were evacuated on January the 5th, and that's like going on 2 months now. And then we're also now thinking about the annual spring flood evacuation that would normally start in April. So our fear is that the longer the situation with this evacuation is happening, that it may just turn into the spring evacuation, and they might be out, where they are, whether it's in Niagara Falls or Timmins or Kingston, till May or June.
Yeah, and that must be really difficult on people being so far away from home. Now, this is not the first time this community has had water issues. And there is some, the minister was supposed to go up there this week, but that's been canceled. Is the federal government taking the problem serious enough?
Well, I know they've been struggling with it for a long time now, and the community has proposed moving to a new site, to a higher ground and a safer location. And that's going on 10 years now, and there's been very little movement on the part of the federal government to honor that commitment that they made to the community back in 2016. And the visit that was supposed to happen on Friday, this coming Friday, was supposed to sort of re-engage the community and the government to talk about that move or that relocation. That was part of the visit, and unfortunately, the minister canceled out on Friday.
Yeah, and I understand that the community, you've probably heard back that they're a little bit upset about that they're not.
Taking lots of frustration for sure, lots of anger, and people are becoming just frustrated with the process and with the government, and just being displaced far away from home for a long period of time is, I'm sure, very difficult, especially for the children and the youth. And that's what we worry about, and that's why we are working hard with the community to ensure that there's proper supports in place wherever they may be.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about initially when we were covering the story is schooling. Of course, they're away from. Are the kids able to get schooling in these communities? Are they getting classes and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for sure. And I know part of the programming that they're doing wherever they are is that schooling needs to be part of the children's schedule during the day, and but it's always a worry.
Okay, and I mean, it's not the only First Nation in Northern Ontario that has water problems. Of course, we've covered these. And this is the same government, of course, that committed to eliminating all the boil water advisories and fixing all these water problems back in 2015, I think, and it hasn't happened. Now we have this First Nations Drinking Water Clean Water Act that's was supposed to be passed in last Parliament. It hasn't reappeared again. Some people are worried about what it may be now. What have you heard about when this legislation is coming forward and what's going to be in it?
Well, I'm meeting with Minister Galmasi tomorrow to have this very important discussion about the legislation on water, that it needs to move forward. The Nishnawbe Nation was one of the main partners when this bill was being drafted a year ago, and the reason why we did that is because we have probably the highest percentage of boil water advisories in the country, in NAN, and my community is one of them. Muskrat Dam has been on that list I think since 2004. That's 22 years. And then, of course, there's Nishnawbe has been on the list as well for over 30 years now, and that's way too long. That's just unacceptable for a community to be without clean water for that long. So that's why we did this work, and I'll be asking the minister tomorrow when I see her to table the bill.
Okay, and I just want to move to another issue of why you're in Ottawa this weekend. That's, of course, that you're down at the Canadian, or going to be down at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal to discuss long-term reform in First Nations child welfare. Now, I know that Chiefs of Ontario and NAN signed an agreement quite some time ago. So, what could you maybe just tell our viewers a bit why this is at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal this week?
It's actually a year ago today that we signed the agreement with Canada. On the Ontario specific agreement. And we had thought that when we signed that agreement a year ago today, that the finish line was just, was very close. But unfortunately, what's happened is that a number of parties have opposed or are opposing the agreement, and that's causing delays. And that's why we're here this week, is to make the final oral arguments in front of the tribunal.
And I know it's a complicated issue, because I know Ontario, specifically First Nations, have their own kind of complicated relationship, not only with the federal government, but also the provincial government in terms of these issues. And I know they supported the initial agreement, broke off. But maybe you can tell our viewers a little bit about, because we know where the Caring Society is going, and the sort of formed, I think they're called the National Children's Chiefs Commission, are going looking for this national deal, but Chiefs of Ontario and NAN has said they're okay with an Ontario deal. So can you maybe tell our viewers about why they're going the two separate ways here, and what's that issue?
Well, I think the bottom line for us is that our children in the Nishnawbe Nation don't have the luxury, the time to wait for the perfect national agreement to happen. Our communities, our families need help right now, and that's why we went ahead last year to negotiate a NAN Ontario specific agreement with Canada, because we know that our children need help right now, and that's why we're pushing this agreement to, and I'm hoping that the tribunal will hear us tomorrow and Friday, and to make a favorable ruling soon.
Okay, well, unfortunately for time purposes, we'll have to end it there. But as always, thanks for joining us here on Nation Nation.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, we'll talk to Jamie Schmale, who is a conservative opposition critic for Crown Indigenous Relations, about some of the Indigenous issues his party is challenging the government on during this session of Parliament. Welcome back. During this session of Parliament in the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee, Conservatives have pressured the Liberals on a number of Indigenous issues. These include tightening up the rules around the Indigenous Business Directory and reducing red tape when it comes to the modern treaty process. Jamie Schmale is the opposition critic for Crown Indigenous Relations, and he joins me today in studio. So welcome back to Nation Nation, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
For sure, yeah. So I guess we'll start off with this week. Of course, you were showing your support for Bill S-228, and that would make forced sterilization a criminal act in the criminal code. Maybe tell me a little bit about why you've decided to sort of get behind this bill.
Absolutely. It was a bill brought to my attention by Senator Boyer, who, and this is her second time around doing this piece of legislation, really has a passion for this piece of legislation. We want to see it get through the finish line as quickly as possible. But what it does is it makes a criminal offense. So in the criminal code, if you are sterilized without your free consent prior to, punishable as aggravated assault. So you could be charged and if convicted, up to 14 years in prison. So this kind of sends a message that sterilization without consent which has largely in the past happened to Indigenous women, but also through my journey through this process, meeting survivors, that it also affects men, those with intellectual challenges as well. So there's a wide swath of people who have been impacted by this practice in Canada. And some would say this is way in our history, but unfortunately it's not.
So I want to, as I talked to you just before we got on the air here about the situation in Kashechewan First Nation, they've been without safe drinking water since early in the new year. Another, water treatment plant problem and safe drinking water problem for First Nations community, and was a canceled trip up there by the ministry yesterday. So this is an ongoing thing, I know, with water and boil water, all these things. What are the Conservatives, I guess, think about this, and what do they want to see the government do on First Nations water issues?
We want to see the amount of boil water advisories brought down to zero. And I know the government has made some progress on this, which we applaud them for. But at the same time, we've had numerous reports from the Auditor General and other parliamentary bodies that have said there could be more that needs to be done. And we want to support that work to ensure that those boil water advisories come to an end. Nobody has to be evacuated from their communities. So that's our priority, getting these done. We've had so many reports on actions the government could take to mitigate potential failures in existing plants, or also ideas on how to build new ones that are using the latest technology. And we want to encourage the government to keep doing that. And if we have the chance to form government at some point in the future, we will be taking that path.
Now, of course, there was the First Nations Drinking Water Act that was in the last Parliament. Liberals made a lot of that. They just wanted to get it through. Then it sort of has disappeared and not come back on the order paper yet. Have you heard anything about that legislation, or where it's at, or what might be in it?
I'm told it's coming at some point, so we will wait for that and see what changes are made. Through that process, the committee process, we were able as the opposition to add a few amendments that we thought would strengthen the bill, that piece of legislation. Unfortunately, Parliament was prorogued and we weren't able to bring that forward to the Parliament again for report stage or third reading. So we will wait to see what the government wants to do, but at the end of the day, we've had numerous witnesses through that process say, yes, C61, which it was called in the past Parliament, did generate a path forward, but also there's work and legislation and policies in place now that the government could be working on to stop this from happening.
And I want to move to another piece of legislation that actually came through the Senate, similar to Bill S-228, which is Bill S-2, which is aims at increasing the numbers of people that can register under the Indian Act. Now, they had quite a dust-up. You may have followed in the Senate over this. The government still wanted to include the second-generation cutoff. It's been eliminated now. What's your thoughts on this legislation, and will you support it in its current form, or what do you think should happen with it?
So Bill S-2, as you know, has two parts for it. The first part was the original intent, I guess, of the piece of legislation, which was the enfranchisement piece. And that is something that we in the opposition supported in the last Parliament. Again, another bill that was unfortunately lost due to Parliament proroguing. So we do support that part. The second part, I think there is some interest on our part to continue this conversation. We haven't taken a position yet on that. We are still investigating and doing some consulting, and we should hopefully have an announcement soon once we've done our due diligence with that. I know the government is continuing to consult. They kind of had an open-end consulting on this, and consultation is a good thing. But I think at the end of the day, there has to be some announcement as of a path forward or a position the government needs to take on it.
Okay, and I can't not ask you also about oil pipelines. I know this has been an issue that's come up a lot with the government. They signed a MOU with the province of Alberta, but there's a lot of First Nations kind of on the coast. I was upset about that. So things, it's not a standstill, but it's not far from going ahead, as your members have brought up in the House. What ways would the Conservatives, I guess, work with First Nations to, I know they support oil pipelines, but to ensure that these projects are actually completed?
Well, I think what we announced prior to the last election and into the last election was initiatives that might help nations come to a yes decision. We've always said there has to be a path to yes and there has to be a path to no. But a lot of the times when, in the past especially, we've had nations left out of revenue sharing or even equity stakes in certain projects. So we had the revenue charge or the resource charge, which ceded tax room by the federal government that paid, I guess, the tax revenue directly to the nations rather than the government itself. We supported a loan guarantee. We supported the infrastructure bank, not in its current form, but in a way that allowed Indigenous nations to have that capacity to get involved in major projects. But we also had a position where we would work with Indigenous organizations like the Major Projects Coalition and many, many others to help nations come to a decision on their own, and then work with them as that decision is made public.
Alrighty, well, unfortunately for time purposes, we'll have to end it there. But as always, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Up next, we'll talk to Tenille Johnson, a First Nations woman who is running to be the next leader of the federal NDP. Welcome back. New Democrats across the country will select their next federal leader at the end of March. 5 people are seeking the position, including Tenille Johnson, member of the Weewakay First Nation in British Columbia and a city councillor in Campbell River. This makes her the first Indigenous person to seek the party's top job. Tenille Johnson joins me now. Welcome to Nation.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity. So I guess obviously these are some challenging times for the NDP and the last election didn't do as well as they hoped, and the party is sort of not polling overly high right now. So I guess I have to ask you, what made you decide to make this big decision to run for the leadership of the party?
Yeah, I mean, I look at challenges and kind of get excited. It's just the spirit that I bring and the perspective that I bring as a social worker. We've never viewed challenges as something to be discouraged about. And our party is in this like major growth opportunity phase, and being a collaborator, bringing people together, working across this is my skill set. This is what I'm really good at. And seeing opportunities of building better relationships between our nations across the country. We have over 600 nations across the country in Canada, and the NDP, and really being that strong government to government relationship in the House of Commons is something that I would love to see our party get out in front of and actually be that party for our nations across the country. And so the work at hand of growing the party is really exciting for me, and I view it as a huge opportunity, like kind of like this blank slate of like, okay, we're down to 7. Now let's regrow in a bigger, bolder way than we ever have before, and then come out in that next election like a big force.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about, of course, we talked a little bit about media coverage and the lead up to, and you're sort of, running one of the smaller campaigns in the in the leadership race. And of course, the NDP frames the party as the People's Party in that. And of course, I noticed the entry fee was not a small amount of money. It's $100,000, and also just how accessible has this, race been to you and others in your situation? And is this something that's a problem that, you have to travel, raise money. It's not an easy thing to do. I know you're still working on that. So is this something that maybe particularly the NDP needs to change in the way it's approaching these types of contests?
Yeah, I think we really do need to reflect on our values in every decision that we make, right? And the high leadership price tag was something that wasn't really supported by any of our electoral areas. Our riding association's leadership did a letter writing campaign and expressed kind of where they felt the leadership ballot costs would sit best. And what I saw coming in was anywhere from that $30,000 that we saw Jagmeet enter the race in, and $75,000. So to kind of end up at this $100,000 with a 25%, I call it a party tax, on top of that $100,000, bringing it to $133,000 to enter the leadership race is really discouraging for a lot of people. And as you offered, like, we are the People's Party. We're supposed to be here for all Canadians, far and wide, rural, isolated, urban. We want to represent everybody and make sure nobody's left behind. And so when you see a price tag like that, it's very, very easy to get discouraged. But again, like, I look at a challenge and I'm like, we can do this. We can make this happen. And so I didn't let the high price tag discourage me from putting in my application and getting a team together and really coming out hard to make sure that we could get on that ballot for folks so that there's diversity on the ballot and people have true choices when they get to vote in March.
Now, of course, this is a Indigenous television network, and you're a First Nations candidate, so it would be remiss of me not to ask you about reconciliation policies and what you would like to see the party adopt if you became leader.
Yeah, I mean, I really want us to be that loud, proud champion for reconciliation, for policies and legislation that are really going to move that work forward. I want us to have those nation to nation relationships so that we can be on the pulse of what the nations across the country are asking for. I mean, there is a huge asset in partnering with the Assembly of First Nations to showing up at their AGMs, showing up at their conferences, and listening to what the priorities are of community. And I mean, I know a big one is the infrastructure gap. So like closing the infrastructure gap, a lot of people look at that as just spending a whole ton of money, but that's not actually what it is. It is an investment, but you're going to get twofold at minimum your money back out of that because it's an investment in the economy. You're also going to get like hundreds of thousands of jobs out of that work across the country. So we need to stop looking at or framing nations, in my opinion, as just something that receives government handouts. That's a really tough label that we take on as Indigenous people across this country, and really like get out there saying, no, this is a phenomenal partnership. When we're talking about moving our economy forward in a good way and quickly, our nations are our best asset in that work. And right now they don't have that relationship or that acknowledgement from our federal government.
Now, I'm sure you're aware that the First Nations or Indigenous voters have often had a pretty strong relationship with provincial NDP governments parties, but not as strong maybe at the federal level. Liberals have seemed to had they've had a pretty strong relationship with Indigenous people. How do you think maybe the what the NDP needs to do to sort of make the NDP the party of Indigenous people?
Yeah, I think we need to show up. We need to show up and sit down and listen to what their priorities are. So even when they're having their provincial meetings, so when the BC caucus of the AFN, the Assembly of First Nations, is meeting, why aren't we there? Why aren't we there sitting and listening for the duration of those meetings to make sure that we're hearing nations appropriately? At the AGMs for the Assembly of First Nations, the different provinces and territories are broken up into their own rooms where their leadership sits. It's their rooms to gather, to meet, to eat, to do what they need to do when they're at those conventions. We could be there. We could go as witnesses, go as guests, and be there to listen and receive the information. So it's not even about going individually to over 600 stops across the country. We as Indigenous people naturally gather in these spaces and talk about priorities. So we have to start showing up and then moving forward with actions that match, demonstrating that we've heard, we're listening, and we're moving forward in a good way in alignment with those asks to make sure that we're supporting our nation's sovereignty across the country.
Right. Yeah, that's something exactly that Elections Canada has made or tried to make some strides in, but still elections are, of course, dependent on where you live in this country and how accessible they are. So obviously that's something that there needs to be some work done on. So good point there. But unfortunately, we'll have to end it there for time purposes. But really, thanks very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks again for having me.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.